What if I told you Africa wasn't conquered because it was weak, but because it was divided, deceived, and ultimately outgunned? For centuries, the African continent was home to powerful kingdoms, advanced trade systems, and global influence. Yet today, many people ask the same question: how did Africa, a continent of such immense wealth and power, fall so completely under foreign rule? Stay with me, because the real story is far more complex and shocking than you might think. We are going to peel back the layers of history they don't teach you in school and uncover the truth behind one of the most significant events in modern history. Before European colonizers set their sights on the continent, Africa was anything but empty, backward, or uncivilized. This is a crucial point to understand. Popular narratives often paint a picture of a dark continent waiting to be discovered, but that couldn't be further from the truth. We're talking about a land of sprawling empires and sophisticated societies. Think of the Mali Empire, led by figures like Mansa Musa, whose wealth was so legendary it supposedly crashed the price of gold in Cairo during his pilgrimage to Mecca. This empire, along with the Songhai Empire that followed, controlled vast trans-Saharan trade routes, dealing in gold, salt, and other precious commodities. They weren't just trading hubs, they were centers of learning. The city of Timbuktu, for instance, housed one of the world's great ancient universities, with libraries filled with manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, law, and philosophy. Then you have the Kingdom of Benin, famous for its incredible bronze sculptures that show a level of artistry and metallurgical skill that baffled Europeans when they first saw them. To the south, the Kingdom of Congo had a highly organized political structure and established diplomatic relations with Portugal as early as the 15th century. In East Africa, the Ethiopian Empire stood as an ancient Christian kingdom with a history stretching back thousands of years, successfully repelling invaders time and time again. And let's not forget Great Zimbabwe in southern Africa, a city of massive stone structures built without any mortar, the capital of a trading empire that stretched to the Indian Ocean. So, Africa was rich not just in gold, diamonds, and resources, but rich in culture, knowledge, and power. The continent was a vibrant, diverse, and interconnected part of the global community. The question then isn't whether Africa was developed. The real question is, what changed? What happened to turn these powerful states into colonies? The conquest of Africa wasn't a single event. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical process that unfolded over centuries in 3 deadly stages. The first stage began not with soldiers, but with traders. When Europeans first arrived on the coasts of Africa, they came as trading partners. They offered seemingly wondrous goods like mirrors, cloth, and most importantly, guns, in exchange for Africa's abundant resources: gold, ivory, and tragically, its people. This marked the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, one of the darkest chapters in human history. For over 400 years, this trade drained the continent of millions of its youngest, strongest, and most capable people. It wasn't just a loss of population, it was a loss of farmers, artisans, leaders, and innovators. Societies were destabilized, economies were shattered, and a cycle of violence was set in motion as some African groups, armed with European guns, raided their neighbors to capture people to sell into slavery. This horrific trade created deep wounds and sowed the seeds of distrust long before colonization truly began. The second stage was the classic strategy of divide and rule. Colonizers became masters at exploiting existing ethnic rivalries and creating new ones where none existed. They would identify tensions between different groups, pick a side, and provide them with weapons and support. By arming one group against another, they fueled internal conflicts that weakened everyone involved. A fragmented, warring Africa was far easier to control than a united one. Local leaders were pitted against each other, forced to make impossible choices, collaborate with the Europeans to gain an advantage over a rival, or resist and risk being crushed by a combination of European and local forces. This strategy broke down traditional alliances and power structures, leaving African societies vulnerable and fractured. The third and final stage was overwhelming military superiority. By the mid to late 19th century, the Industrial Revolution had given Europe a technological advantage that was simply insurmountable. They had developed weapons of war that African armies, despite their bravery and strategic skill, could not match. The most infamous of these was the Maxim gun, the first fully automatic machine gun. It could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, allowing a small group of European soldiers to defeat armies many times their size. As the saying went, whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. Added to this were steamships, which allowed Europeans to travel deep into the African interior via rivers, bypassing coastal defenses and difficult terrain. Railroads followed, enabling the rapid transport of troops and resources. Europe's industrial economies could produce these weapons and technologies on a massive scale. African resistance was fierce and widespread, but they were often fighting with spears and outdated firearms against machine guns and artillery. They were tragically, brutally outgunned. The culmination of all this was the infamous Scramble for Africa. By the 1880s, European powers were in a frenzy of competition, each trying to claim a piece of the African continent for itself. To avoid fighting a war among themselves, they decided to settle the matter in a more civilized way. In 1884, representatives from 14 European nations, plus the United States, gathered in Germany for the Berlin Conference. There was one glaring omission from the guest list: no Africans were invited. Not a single one. For 3 months, these men sat around a table with maps of Africa, drawing lines with rulers. They paid no attention to the thousands of distinct cultures, languages, kingdoms, and ethnic groups that lived there. They carved up the continent like it was a cake at a birthday party. Borders were drawn straight through the middle of established kingdoms and tribal lands, splitting communities in half. At the same time, long-standing enemies were suddenly forced together into a single, artificially created colony. These arbitrary borders are the source of so much of the conflict and instability that has plagued parts of Africa to this day. By 1914, just a few decades after the conference, over 90% of the African continent was under the control of a handful of European powers. This wasn't exploration or discovery. It was a well-organized, continent-wide theft, sanctioned by international agreement. The goal was simple: to extract Africa's vast mineral and agricultural wealth to fuel Europe's industrial economies. But let's be absolutely clear, Africa did not just lie down and accept its fate. The story of colonization is also a story of heroic, determined, and often tragic resistance. All across the continent, African leaders and their people fought back fiercely against the invaders. In West Africa, Samori Toure, the founder of the Wassoulou Empire, led a brilliant guerrilla war against the French for nearly 2 decades. He even established his own gun manufacturing workshops to try and match French firepower. In southern Africa, the Zulu kingdom, under leaders like Shaka and later Setchwe, mounted one of the most famous resistance campaigns. In 1879, at the Battle of Isandwania, a Zulu army inflicted a stunning and humiliating defeat on a technologically superior British force, proving that European conquest was not inevitable. And perhaps the most successful story of resistance comes from Ethiopia. In 1896, Emperor Menelik led his nation to a decisive victory against Italy at the Battle of Adwa. Menelik had spent years modernizing his army, stockpiling modern weapons from various European sources by playing them against each other. When the Italians invaded, they were met by a large, well-equipped, and highly motivated Ethiopian force. The victory was so complete that it secured Ethiopia's sovereignty, making it the only African nation, aside from Liberia, to successfully resist European colonization. But these victories were the exceptions. For most, resistance was ultimately crushed. Betrayal from within, where some leaders chose to collaborate with the colonizers, weakened the united front. The sheer economic and military pressure from Europe was relentless. Even when one rebellion was put down, the underlying system of colonial exploitation remained, making long-term resistance almost impossible. The spirit of resistance never died, but it was forced underground, waiting for the day it could rise again in the fight for independence. So, let's bring it all together. Africa wasn't conquered because it was weak, primitive, or lacked civilization. It was conquered because a centuries-long slave trade bled it of its people and sowed division. It was conquered because European powers masterfully exploited internal rivalries, turning Africans against each other. And ultimately, it was conquered because of a massive technological and military gap created by the Industrial Revolution. Unity was broken, societies were fractured, and brave resistance was met with overwhelming force. This history is not just in the past. The arbitrary borders drawn in Berlin, the economies designed solely for extraction, and the ethnic tensions inflamed by colonial policies continue to affect the continent today. Understanding this real history is the first step toward understanding the challenges and incredible potential of modern Africa. If you found this history lesson valuable and want to learn more of the real stories they never taught you in school, please show your support. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into hidden history, and share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth. Thanks for watching.